Welcome to the Lindamood-Bell Leaders in Literacy webinar series. My name's Dave Kivita. I'm the Director of Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools. And I'm pleased and honored to be joined today by a person I consider a good friend at this point, Jennifer Thompson from Fulton County Schools. And we're going to be talking about how Fulton County Schools really built a literacy instruction model for their special education students. And in particular about how they worked with us to design a professional development model that could be sustainable long-term over a very large district. So with that said, I'm going to throw it over to Jen to introduce herself and talk a little bit about Fulton County Schools.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well, Jen.
So my name is Jennifer Thompson, as Dave mentioned, and I'm one of the instructional coordinators here in Fulton County Schools. And my focus is literacy, all things related to literacy as it relates to students with disabilities. And so we do have that singular focus. And so I'm so happy to be here with Dave to talk about this thing that we're doing and that we want to sustain.
Great. And just so that folks have a little bit of background, Jen, about how big is Fulton County Schools and where are you guys located?
So we are located, if you envision Atlanta, all things surrounding Metro Atlanta, surrounding suburban areas. And so if you think about here in the state of Georgia, the city of Atlanta, the areas outside of the cities of Atlanta, we are the fourth largest district in the state. And we have roughly 94,000 students here in our district.
Excellent. Thanks for that background, Jen. And you know, there are some things that I think folks want to be kind of keeping in mind as we go through our discussion today. And part of that has to do with the model of instruction that Lindamood-Bell programs provide. And it's important to have a little bit of background knowledge on that because it underlies the professional development model choices that Fulton County and other districts make. And Lindamood-Bell instruction is really based on developing the underlying sensory cognitive functions that allow students to learn how to read and comprehend. And those three cognitive functions are phonemic awareness, which I think everybody is pretty familiar with at this point, right? The ability to locate sounds within words. And then what's called symbol imagery. And symbol imagery is that ability to attach sounds and letters together into your mind so that you can picture the letters and the sounds that go with those, what some people refer to as orthographic mapping. And then there's what's called concept imagery. Concept imagery is the ability to create a movie in your mind for language as it's coming in and be able to hold on to that movie so that you can understand it sequentially, think critically about it, be able to summarize the information and come up with main ideas. And so the programs at Lindamood-Bell are not scripted. And that's important to know too, because they allow for teachers to differentiate instruction based on where teachers are seeing their students' strengths and weaknesses. And just so that you know, as we go forward in the conversation, the two programs that Fulton County Schools is using is the Seeing Stars program, which addresses phonemic awareness and symbol imagery. And then the visualizing and verbalizing program, which develops students' concept imagery, right? And these three sensory cognitive functions obviously play a role in terms of students' ability to get down on the page and first be able to sound out words using their phonological processing, then be able to recognize words as they do that process of mapping the sounds and letters within words and being able to picture those words. And then also, when we think about visualizing and verbalizing, to develop students' vocabulary skills so that they can use contextual cues to read quickly and fluently, with all of those pieces feeding into the overall circle of comprehension, which is that whole point of reading, right? And so I love to talk about this Venn diagram at the beginning of all of our conversations, because as we do go through this discussion today, those of you who are watching will want to think about, when I think about my special education students or just my struggling students, how can I use something like this diagram to try to identify where their strengths and weaknesses are? Because that's going to help me determine what type of intervention I'm going to give to them and how I'm going to group them. So with that said, here's our agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk a little bit about what Fulton County Schools was doing historically for special education students and what instruction looks like, what kind of challenges they saw facing them, what it is that what drove their selection of Lindamood-Bell as a literacy partner. And then really we'll dive into how it is that Fulton County Schools put into place specific structures to help build and maintain that instruction over the long term. And that's going to include things like being able to use data to help create buy-in and thinking about who it is that needs to be bought in order to help build that capacity. So with all of that said, Jen, maybe you can walk us through a little bit about what instruction has been like historically for special ed students in Fulton County.
Absolutely. So one of the first steps that occurred in what I like to consider a journey of changing the literacy instruction for students with disabilities here in Fulton County Schools included reviewing the data. And so reviewing the current and the historical reading data for our students, we analyzed that data as a team, keeping in mind we did a lot of comparisons between the performance of our general ed students as well as the performance of our students with disabilities. And with that said, Dave, we always had in the back of our mind this common understanding that the bulk of our students that we serve fall into that average range of intelligence. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a literary scholar, but what it does mean is that you have the capacity to learn this process. So then we had to ask ourselves, why the significant gap between the performance of our gen ed students and the performance of the students with disabilities? And one of the things that we came to terms with is that we weren't willing to accept that discrepancy that was pretty obvious between the two groups. So we kept digging through the data. We sent out surveys, classroom observations, discussions with special education teachers and staff and personnel, instructional leaders, just to create more context around that data, because we didn't want to make any assumptions surrounding what we saw and had to own as the SEC department. And so what we found was pretty revealing. You know, we created this expectation of providing specially designed instruction regarding reading instruction for students with disabilities, but the pathway of getting it done wasn't completely clear. Yeah. How were teachers expected to do this thing? And so with that said, we had schools who were doing lots of things well, schools with POCs that were planning instruction and problem solving, but throughout all of that goodness, you know, there were those sprinkles of inconsistencies. And so we found that we kind of lacked that consistent instructional practice and that common understanding regarding literacy instruction that would unite us all throughout the district. So once we were able to kind of script out the data, answer the questions of why, we identified that problem of practice, we came together as a group. And one of the things that we had to do was align ourselves on what the science was saying regarding reading, what it takes to read and what should be present in reading instruction, which is not new. The science of reading is not new research, but it's not as common as we would like it to be. But I think a lot of us across the nation are getting there. And so we had to also determine what is our goal, what do we want to do, what are we trying to accomplish, what are we trying to do, and then how do we embed the components of structured literacy into daily instruction for students with disabilities? And it wasn't easy. It took a lot of grappling with the team. And in comes, of course, those district leaders to kind of help guide that process. But the other component that we also had to tangle with is that we know teachers are providing, again, SDI, which is specially designed instruction. But again, how are they accomplishing this thing? And so with that being said, a lot of those internal structures that you see here, over the course of the years, we got a new executive director who came in and recognized that, hey, there's a lot of compliant components that have to occur in special education, but there's also instructional work that needs to be done as well. So the action steps that I'm discussing with you today occurred before there was a Lindamood-Bell partnership, right? So when you lift up the rug and you see the dirt, you know, we had to decide, Is this going to be a cleanup with a dustpan and a broom, or do we need an overhaul and a thorough cleansing of what we found? So several years ago, we got a new executive director, Blake Magaha, came in, and he created these two working teams, the compliance team and instructional team. And that creation allowed several of us to have a singular content-specific focus. No one's going to argue, and I don't know your background in special education, Dave, that special education is full of compliance tasks, right? There's lots of paperwork, documentation, timelines, meetings within that realm of education. But what's great is having those high-level stakeholders who champion the right work and say, hey, in addition to, we need to focus on the instruction. And so creating that instructional team allowed us to have that singular focus. And so we can focus on improving student outcome and growing special education teachers. And so in addition to those various working groups, several additional components were created internally to set the stage for kind of changing that literacy instruction. Our director, Shea Peterson, came in. She led the development of the core behaviors. And so here we identified the knowledge, the skills, the behaviors that we want all of the special education teachers here in Fulton County Schools to demonstrate. Then within those core behaviors, we explicitly state what should occur when special education teachers are planning, implementing, and monitoring specially designed instruction. So a lot happened before you and I had that first encounter, Dave. Yep. But in addition to the core behaviors, we also made another huge investment, which I didn't see, but thank goodness for those high-level instructional leaders that we have. And that was the creation of the specially designed instructional coach, what we refer to as the SDI coach. And I don't have to convince you of the power of coaching, right? It's something that your staff developers are also providing to our teachers. But our SDI coaches support teachers in creating that personalized learning pathway that will connect the student to their needed instruction based on what's stated in that IEP. And remember, the IEP, now this is just something that I believe and I hold tight to. The IEP will identify the needs of the students, but it doesn't tell teachers how to teach. And that was the piece that we wanted to support all of our schools with. So we recognize, and I was a special education teacher as well, special education teachers need support and a thought partner in the how. How do we move a student whose needs go beyond that singular teacher in the classroom? Is not easy. And whoever minimizes that process, you haven't taught in a classroom, right? Yep. But one of the other things that united us as a department, and the good news under all of that, is that all of the skills that are needed for reading are the same. So that was something that we can rest on. And so we didn't have to reinvent that wheel. It's now connecting the teacher to the how.
Yep. Got it. That's great. And I love how you all kind of attack that. There's that saying that's been around forever. There's nothing special about special education, right? So just putting a kid in that classroom doesn't change what's happening for that student, right? Correct. We've got to go through and figure out, how do we provide that teacher with the specific knowledge that he or she needs in order to develop the skills that student needs in order to be able to access the content material. And so maybe you guys can talk a little bit about, sort of selecting Lindamood-Bell and what it was that you were looking for a little bit more in detail.
Absolutely. So with all of those action steps, that really doesn't summarize, I think, as much work that went into the pre-work of selecting the right partnership. It was clear that we needed high quality professional learning and curriculum materials for our special education teachers. But we also wanted this to be consistent and sustainable across the district. And one of the things that, again, that I hold dear to me is, if you want to change behavior, you've got to identify the replacement behavior. And so if you're going to eat a candy bar, what are you going to eat instead? Well, you've got to state that thing. Yep. And so the SCC department, we followed the district guidelines of selecting that curriculum materials and partnering with the vendor. And so we were looking for a methodology that we knew was rooted in the science of reading. And we're not just using that because it's the popular phrase right now. It's because we knew that this was the type of instruction. We have information in site reports and in IEPs that say, hey, these students can learn how to read. and they deserve effective and evidence-based instruction. So the science of reading tells us how to do it. And so we also wanted to focus on training. So not just drop those materials in the laps of teachers, but we're going to train you, but then we're also going to increase your awareness, your knowledge, your skills, and what it takes to read. Because sometimes understanding and having that background information, now it makes sense how the science of reading, what it takes to read, and the steps of Lindamood-Bell come together to do that thing. And so, yes, we were looking for a product, a vendor, a partnership to encompass all of those things, align the understanding of what it takes to read, provide professional development in conjunction to what we were doing internally as well. And then also we've got to put a product in the hands of the teachers as well.
Yep. And I think that's great. And I love how you said, focus on training and a process, because reading isn't about just having content dropped in the lap of a student, as you've said, right? It is about developing those processes for students. And in order to help develop those, of course, the teachers first have to develop their own skill in delivering that, right? And so, when the programs are sort of about process-based instruction, and we do talk about differentiating is hard, right? A scripted program in which everybody does the same thing at 2 weeks, or everybody does the same thing at 4 weeks, is easier to do. Of course, it's not effective or as effective as differentiating instruction to meet students' needs. That's more challenging. And so teachers also have to go through that process from those initial workshops to, I know as we'll talk about a little bit later, kind of the job-embedded professional development and the collaborative learning opportunities that teachers get throughout the entire school year as they're implementing the programs with their students. So, going into it, I know we had lots of discussions about the structure that we wanted to build, and we had created a lot of pieces to that structure, Jen. And of course, you always hit the ground running feeling like you've got all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted, and then you kind of learn as you're going out there and implementing what are some changes that you need to be able to make. But maybe if you take us back to what were some of the challenges that you spotted right off the bat in terms of thinking about how are we going to do this over a 3-year plan? Because as you said at the beginning, you've got 94,000 students. That's a lot of special education teachers that you've got to train and support. And so the idea was to kind of roll this out across the district over a 3-year process. So maybe talk a little bit about what were some of the concerns just walking in the door with it, and then kind of take us through how it's evolved.
So with a district this large, a strategic rollout was needed. And so, of course, we put a plan together, presented it to our instructional leaders. And so what you see here is our ability of being strategic in the rollout allowed us to address stakeholder concerns and questions, pivot, troubleshoot in real time. Part of that partnership is as we partner with the schools, include monthly meetings with principals at the principal's discretion so that they can learn more about Lindamood-Bell and what it looks like in their building. We provide the virtual look-ins with an administrator so that they can see their teachers receiving the virtual coaching as well. So in year one, we did start mainly with our intensive elementary schools, but we also included schools throughout the district because we wanted a clear view and a clear picture of what Lindamood-Bell instruction would look like throughout several different communities. Year two, we rolled out into program classes, and we also made an attempt to follow the feeder pattern. So those students who received Lindamood-Bell during our first year, where are they going regarding middle school? Those students have shown that I'm still needing this intensive instruction, and we didn't want that to stop. And so therefore, we also rolled out into select middle schools, year two. And then year three, now we are in all K through 8 schools here in Fulton County.
That's great. And I love how you talked a little bit about the principal capacity and leadership. And just so that people have some background, what the Fulton County special educators are receiving is they get that initial training. And then each week they've got a Lindamood-Bell virtual consultant who sits in a session, and they kind of either model a lesson or co-teach a lesson or provide feedback to the teacher as the teacher drives instruction. And what that means is what Jen was describing earlier is when we have those monthly meetings with principals get an opportunity to virtually go into the classroom and watch some of that coaching and instruction happening with their teacher, and then get a chance to debrief following that with the project director to talk about what it was that they saw, what was going really well, where they want to see improvement happening over time. And that really helps create that buy-in and that understanding for principals. So one of the things that I think, when I did get to visit that first year, and I haven't been able to visit again since because of COVID, but when I did get to visit, what was great to see was how engaged principals have been. And that, in many districts, sometimes special education is treated as something separate from what's happening with the rest of the kids, and principals don't really take ownership of what's happening there. And so it's been really wonderful to see, even as we did transition into COVID, seeing those principal meetings continue to occur and those principals continuing to engage in that process has been exciting. And Jen, I know that part of building that buy-in was to try to take a look at what were some of the impacts of using Lindamood-Bell with students in the district. And so maybe you can talk with us a little bit about what happened when you got a chance to take a look at the iReady growth mid-year of that first year.
Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the staff developer with Lindamood-Bell is one way that we support, but I also wanted to talk about the partnership. We've got that SDI coach who's there to provide and be the boots on the ground. And this is the person who, again, is that continued champion who knows the culture, the climate, the day in and day out grind of what the teacher is, facing every day regarding instruction. And then this is the person who thought partners on a daily basis and goes through coaching actions and coaching cycles with the teacher to continue to build their capacity, thought partner, and be that circle of support. So it's just a lot of support that we wanted to build surrounding implementing high quality instruction. And then, of course, maintaining the fidelity of Lindamood-Bell.
Yeah.
And so you're right.
So for all those years forward. Yeah.
One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did was, again, not just drop this in the laps of teachers and say, okay, we've done this, move forward and teach, because we know it doesn't work that way. And one of the analogies I like to use when it comes to coaching, to go back to that for a minute, is that even your star player on the team has a coach. And not because they're failing, but they have a coach to stay great. And so that's how I envision coaching. And so the partnership with you guys, the internal structures, going back to the SDI coach, that's the winning team in my vision. Now, this is just Jennifer's thoughts, but that's just part of one of those pieces to ensure that the teacher's needs are being met, because that's going to pour into the student outcome that we're looking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great point.
So one of the things that we, part of the instructional cycle, and one of the things that we did was we had to determine how are we going to monitor this progress across the district. And then, of course, me and the team, we can't comb through every strand of data, but we comb through a lot. And so one of the things that we have at our disposal is a feature, which is iReady. And so, hey, we've got Lindamood-Bell here. We've got specially designed instruction. Let's track some of the progress of Lindamood-Bell and use this as one of those data points to determine the effectiveness and the growth of our students. And so what you have here, and of course, iReady is a very dense platform, but we took a look across many domains. One of the features is typical growth and stretch growth. And so what you see here is our very first semester of implementation. And so the typical growth, this really quantifies where a student should land by the end of the year. And all of that is generated by a scale score. And so what we have is the Lindamood-Bell students, and we also have the comparison group, and meaning these are the students who are in special education who are not receiving Lindamood-Bell. And so as you can see here, we started implementing in August, and then we were able to, again, get another benchmarking of this data in December. And so by the middle of the year, which is December, 44% of the students receiving Lindamood-Bell had met their typical growth by the middle of the school year, meaning that thing that should have occurred at the end of the school year occurred now by December, as opposed to the comparison group. And those are the students who weren't receiving Lindamood-Bell. 16% of those students had met that benchmark. So then you go to 3/4 of the way, and these are the students who are 99 to 75% there. 10% of those students were right there at meeting their typical growth by the middle of the school year, 10% of those students who received Lindamood-Bell versus 5% from the comparison group. And then who were those students, if you think of a football field, who were right there on the 50-yard line? 10% of those students were right where they should be, who received Lindamood-Bell instruction versus the 6% of students who weren't receiving Lindamood-Bell. And then totality, by the end of the year, 64% of the students who received Lindamood-Bell instruction met or exceeded their typical growth by the end of the school year, as opposed to the students who weren't receiving this instruction, it was 27%.
Got it. And I know you also took a look at stretch growth as well.
You know, one of the things that we have upon us is, you know, this phrase of getting better faster, right? And so we don't want to live in typical growth. We want to live in stretch growth if you truly want to close the achievement gap. And so this was really pertinent for us. We wanted to take a look at this data. It was also a celebratory moment for us because we had proven what we already knew. Our students are readers, right? And so what we have here, 15% by the middle of the year. And stretch growth is when a student goes beyond that typical growth. And now I am actually into another realm of learning. And I've exceeded what I should have learned in one academic year. I've surpassed that. And so what we had, 15% of our students who received Lindamood-Bell had achieved their stretch growth by December. And again, that was a high five for us, a high five for the teachers, a high five for the schools and the principals for taking a risk and trying something different, as opposed to the comparison group, that 5% who had met their stretch growth by the middle of the year. Who were those students who were 3/4 of the way there, 99 to 75% there? 12% of our Lindamood-Bell students had achieved that distinction, as opposed to the 4% of the students who were not receiving Lindamood-Bell. And then again, thinking about a football field, where are our students? Who were the students that were right there at the 50-yard line? 18% of our students were right there in achieving their stretch growth by the middle of the school year, as opposed to those students who unfortunately weren't receiving Lindamood-Bell, 13%. And so again, in totality, 45% of our students who received Lindamood-Bell met or exceeded their stretch growth, as opposed to 22% of the students who did not receive Lindamood-Bell. And of course, when you see these type of results, you know, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so instead of lifting our feet off the gas, we took another plan to our instructional leaders and made a proposal to continue this work and to continue to expand in additional schools.
Great. That's great. I know that was exciting to take a look at all of that data with you, Jen, and then to be able to go and talk about some of the, you know, challenging decisions that had to get made in order to implement and to see that had made an impact was really encouraging. Maybe you can walk us through a little bit more about some of those support structures. I know you talked about them a little bit earlier, but it'd be great to hear even more about it, because I know that's what is going to allow Fulton County to continue to implement the programs on into the future. So go for it for that part, Jen.
So building and maintaining a common understanding. One of the things that I'm really excited about, and it does speak to another realm of learning, is the letters content, in which now everyone will have this shared understanding of what it takes to read. And Lindamood-Bell fits perfectly within that content as well. And then, of course, the job embedded virtual coaching for every teacher. So during our first year, we started small, didn't quite know exactly what the virtual coaching would look like. We anticipated it. You explained it to myself and Sherry very thoroughly, but we said, wait, not quite sure. Yeah. But we moved forward with it. And now one of the things that's part of our partnership and one of the things that we took to our instructional leaders is moving forward, you know, as we continue this partnership, we are coaching through the staff developer, all of our teachers, as well as, again, the boots on the ground, the SDI coach. So again, between the two coaches, you've got that continued circle of support. And then, of course, the SDI coaches support that job embedded professional learning, the monthly cohorts. That's when a coach, the SDI coach, brings all of their teachers together. And then they talk all things Lindamood-Bell, talk about more about the steps within the methodology, talk about more of hey, here are the skills needed for reading. Let's align those steps to Lindamood-Bell. So whatever complexities, whatever questions a teacher may have, there is the SDI coach and the virtual coach to provide that needed support. And so that is also included in our partnership. And then, of course, we just wanted to shower teachers with opportunities for professional learning. Having the background knowledge, having the tangibles, having the resources, putting it all together is what we see as a formula for growing the teacher, but then also improving student outcomes.
Great. That's fantastic. So long-term, I know you went into this with some long-term goals and of course those evolve, but you still really do have those there. Maybe you can speak a little bit more in detail about what those long-term goals were.
Well, one of the things that we noticed a lot of other states were adopting was dyslexia legislation. And so it's only a matter of time before it just makes its way across the nation. And so, but we didn't want to wait for that. We didn't want to wait for someone to say what should be happening in our particular space regarding looking at the data. And so we knew that we needed to make an instructional change. And so we went through all of those action steps that I discussed before to land on the side of students and doing what's right for instruction. The other component was consistency. This isn't a practice or a method of teaching that we are going to try for 12 months and put it down. This is, we want this to remain and be the norm of literacy instruction for a large population of the students here in Fulton County. And then, of course, principals and teachers are critical stakeholders. These are the individuals that have direct access to teachers and families. And so supporting them with their understanding, answering any questions that they need. Myself, you, Dave, and some of the other project directors, we've met with lots of principals because we want them to know that we're here to answer any of your questions, whatever it may be regarding that instruction in your building. And so keeping those two stakeholders in the forefront of our minds, I think, is an approach that's been beneficial for all of us. And then teaching reading, it's not a fad. It's not a popular thing for right now. We know that this is a life skill. And if we want to prepare our students to go out there into the world, you need to be able to do this thing. And so one of the quotes that I love to read is a quote by another author, Dr. Louisa Moats, who talks about, hey, one of the fundamental purposes of a school is to teach students how to read. And so I'm constantly gauging, am I part of that solution or not? And so if not, what more can I do to help?
That's great. It's great. And it has been a real pleasure, working with Fulton County Schools to roll this out and make an impact for all of the students across the district there, and know that by teaching these teachers how to use these programs, it's just going to grow that impact, right? Because each year that teacher is seeing more students and that impact that they're having with them continues astronomically. And it's really great. I do think the most important thing we can teach kids to do at school is to learn how to read, because that's what's going to ultimately empower them to become independent. So thank you so much, Jen, for joining us today and talking us through your implementation in Fulton County Schools. Both Jen's contact information and mine are there on the slide. We'd love to interact with folks out there who watch the webinar and have questions or want to learn a little bit more about Fulton County's implementation. Jen, did you want to say anything to kind of wrap up at all?
No, I think we kind of discussed all of those large buckets of information, and you've got my contact information out there. So if anyone has any questions regarding our stance on literacy, any questions regarding what's happening, feel free to contact me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you all for joining us for this Leaders in Literacy webinar. Feel free to stop by the website. You can check out some of our past webinars that we've held with other district leaders. And certainly you can see upcoming webinars that will be coming in the future. Thank you all so very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dave.